So Leslie Burrs, I'm glad you could take some time out to talk to me about I Can't Breathe. And I'd like to start by asking you, how did this project come about?
Well, apparently, Catherine Frady and Brandon J. Gibson with Marble City Opera uh, were very concerned with what they were experiencing through this period of police brutality and the deaths of African Americans, particularly with George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and a few others. And they were happening so rapidly and in such a concentrated period of time that people were getting overwhelmed from it. And so Catherine Frady is the executive director. She runs the Marble City Opera Company. And Brandon Gibson is also one of the administrators for the company. And so they were appalled by what they were experiencing and witnessing and feeling helpless. And to help get around that feeling of helplessness is Catherine was asking, what can we do about this? We can't just sit here. The only thing I have control over is the access to my opera company. And so it dawned on her that they should try to find a means to address the issues that were being put on the news at any given moment with the next death of an African American by the hands of police. And so she and Brandon looked, and they were trying to determine if there was a work that already existed that could address it. They could not find what they were satisfied with, something that they'd be satisfied with. Catherine came up with the brilliant idea, Brandon, could you write an opera about this? Brandon said, well, yes, I think, because he's a writer, but he had never written a libretto. And he responded half-heartedly, is my understanding, not taking it that seriously until he saw that it was announced that Brandon Gibson will be writing the libretto. And so he then took it very seriously, and he wrote what has proven to be a remarkable libretto, one that could stand on its own, frankly, without the music. It could be a theater piece, but at the same time, they're both opera-oriented, and they wanted that statement to be made through the format of an opera. Also, they decided that they wanted the scenes to have these independent elements to them, or they were calling them at the time monodramas. And there are 6 scenes and then a 7th culminating finale scene. So that's what happened. He wrote a beautiful piece. Then it was time to find a composer. One of their board members, who happened to be at the University of Maryland, and she was the teacher, one of the 2 teachers for my daughter's as a voice major, sat on the board. She was very familiar with my work as a composer, and as a board member, she suggested that maybe they should consider reaching out to me. Her name is Dolores Ziegler. She's a very prominent and very famous mezzo in her own right, known internationally, Dolores Ziegler. So Dolores made that recommendation. They looked online and found some of my music and were very taken with it, reached out to me and asked if I would be interested. And of course, I said yes. So that's how that all came about.
So what you're dealing with this libretto that has, let's call them 6 stories or 6 archetypes in it. How did you want to address these archetypes musically? Did you want it to be, sort of something that each had its own identity, that in the culmination at the end would musically come together? What was your approach?
Well, what you just described is we are of like minds, because that's exactly what I decided to do. And so the thing that I think I point out in these types of interviews is this would have been my 4th or 5th opera. And previously I'd written the operas with very prominent writers and authors, award-winning, known internationally for what they do, but they were all of a certain generation. And so they had a concept of how they would write, and they wrote a lot with the intent of having, arias to stop the action in order for me to then create a work to help, frankly, show off the singer, or more, I guess more accurately, is to make sure that whatever the point in the scene is being made that is highly personal for the character, the scene stops and that's what happens. So I was used to that. And they also wrote for choirs. So I was accustomed to all of that, and there was a rhythm to their writing. So because Brandon is in his 30s, a young twerp, so he's writing in a style that had an energy and a pace to it that was completely different from anything I had experienced. And frankly, when I received the libretto, I panicked for a moment, saying, well, this is way different. This is very different than anything I'm accustomed to. Should I ask, could he change something or put it in this context that I was more accustomed to? And I said, man, you are just being a wimp. You're being, I would actually say a punk, just being a wimp, because I was fearful that I couldn't pull off the required energy and pace of this particular style of writing. And I said, this is a challenge for me, and I need to live up to the challenge. And so that's the first aspect of what happened when I received the libretto. And once I committed to that, I started gravitating to the pace, and the way that Brandon wrote each of the individual monodramas. At that time, there was an emphasis on that perspective. I decided, okay, each character, he has a generic name for them: the mother, the athlete, the thug, the scholar, the father, and then the lover. So he did that so deliberately, because there's an effort that's always made in society to lump us as African Americans into just one category. And the way he was doing it by putting this heading is, there's going to be so much depth to each of the characters that that he wanted to make sure people understood how our everyday lives are, how they play themselves out each day. So I decided, just what you were suggesting, is each character needs its own motif. That was one of the first things. And my standard practice is to create a sketchbook of motivic ideas that I can go to and to see if they'll fit any of the rhythm of librettos and all. So I had created that sketchbook of motifs, right? And so and then I realized, oh, I think this motif would work well with the mother. I think this motif would work well with whatever the next character was. And that proved to be very helpful. Also, because what's also unique about this is, at its bare minimum, the opera can be presented with only one person per scene, which is even more challenging in its own right. So I wanted to make sure that the audience was not going to get lulled into thinking they would know what's going to happen next, because the same themes would carry through for each 6 scenes, and it might even shut them down. So I wanted to make sure the scene would start with a motif that would then be associated with the character. It would carry through in certain ways, but once you hear it, first of all, it would be, each scene would start with something different, and then the association with the theme to the character and to the action that's taking place, and then the development of all of that. And then, just as you suggested, Craig, what happened after that is it all culminated. I brought all the motifs together for the finale, because each of the characters, they did not interact ever prior, but in the finale, in the last section of the opera, they are in this spirit world and they get to know each other. And so by me making use of the motifs, it allows the audience to be refreshed of who and what they are and what's going on here. So you are very smart. So yes.
Well, I am also a lapsed piano performance major, so I have studied music. So that probably helps a little bit. I was able to, I didn't have time to watch the full opera, but I did see, a portion of each of these stories, and I've read the libretto. And I think for anybody who's paying attention, you know what these stories are. They are stories we know from the news, And what we're seeing is a different side of that story. We're not necessarily experiencing the crime as such. It's about who the person is, or who the person is that's impacted by these crimes. What did making these stories, for lack of a better way of putting it, somewhat generic and focused on the individual allow you both to express in terms of what you'd like the audience to understand about, I guess the best way to say it would be the humanity behind the headlines?
Yes, okay, that's very good. Let me see how I want to say this. We made a decision, Brandon first, and then me complying with the decision that, again, the word generic is very important because with the title, particularly for the thug is a classic situation of what the intent was on Brandon's part as a librettist, is that when you see that word gets assigned to almost any Black man walking the street. I've had that in my neighborhood in the suburbs of Philadelphia. And living here 26 years, neighbors that have known me but are not Black, and the first thing they say is, "Oh, look at that thug walking down the street," saying that to me, and they know me. But it is convenient, but it's also dangerous. And so the way the scenes are constructed, particularly with, we'll use the thug as an example, that's the title. But the title is actually meant to be a contradiction to the reality of the stereotype, okay? And so when the scene plays itself out, you become so, you have such a relationship with the Black man that's playing with the title of the thug, realizing how much depth there is to his life, how caring he was, and how society had set it up so that it was easier to view him and to dehumanize him as a thug, as opposed to recognizing all the nuances, all the subtleties of this very humane individual, this very caring individual who had to fight his way through life because society was set up that not only do they see you a certain way, but it permits other factions of society to inflict pain on you and to also prevent you from accomplishing goals. And so what is generic is the title, but what is not generic is the depth of what is being portrayed through the writing and then through the character and certainly through the music.
Well, which dovetails nicely into my next question was what can music, and in this case, this opera, do to provide greater definition and greater understanding to the humanity of these people, so that the stereotype can at some point disappear?
All right, so again, very good. I would look at the libretto. I would not try, but my goal is always to identify the rhythm of the storyline, not necessarily the rhythm in musically, but the rhythm of the storyline, of the way the character is being presented and how their thoughts and all are working. And so I allow those rhythms, I allow the pacing of the syllables sometimes even more so than the words, but then the actual words themselves, the phrases, so that the music then becomes a part of how to portray the rhythm of the individual, right? The rhythm of the moment, and then the rhythm through the music, right? And so, so I'm conscious of all of those things when I'm attacking the libretto. And so that's what comes into play. And I try to identify the one thing that one of the things I found unique with Brandon's writing is the way you would review the libretto itself. It frankly never allowed for the concept of arias, of action to be stopped. And that was deliberate on Brandon's part. I had to make a compromise for that intent because I was fearful that the music, if you're writing the music only to keep advancing forward, it will give no one an opportunity to rest and reflect within the moment, right? And so the music, I then would identify things that words that were in the text that I thought needed to be reinforced in different ways and utilized as refrains, and also to allow for these moments that that the singer is not just telling a narration, and what they're telling then is a reflective and inner exposure of who they are. And so I had the opportunity to coach the singers leading up to their, rehearsing the opera. And what we discovered is, yeah, this music's being written to convey the libretto in a manner that sometimes it is an external piece where it's meant to advance the narrative. Other times it is a highly personalized internal piece that the character is allowing the audience to have permission to come into that, because they want to confide into with the way the music's written, to allow them to confide into their emotions, their concerns with the audience. Other times I would view what was being written musically to convey the text, that it was an internal and only they know, and speaking to themselves. I mean, obviously the audience is experiencing it, but they're experiencing it where it's a very internalized private perception, and they're privy to it, not necessarily by being invited in, but by the nature of the performance. Does that make sense?
It does make sense. And I think I can sum it up, part of that up rather ironically. You needed to allow room for the opera to breathe.
That's exactly right. Exactly right. Here's the other thing that we also wanted to stress. Just like the titles, The Mother, The Thug, and all, where you make a stereotype, have a stereotype perception of that, the title, I Can't Breathe, people automatically assume, one, it's going to be very controversial, right? And maybe we found even funders, they get fearful of that. So they want to hands off. They don't want to be associated with that. But the irony with the title, I Can't Breathe, the way that it gets utilized throughout the course of the opera is, sometimes you say, I can't breathe out of fear, right? Just like George Floyd said in calling out to his mother, and letting the public know, letting the man that's killing him, letting him know, I can't breathe. Where's your humanity, right? But other times you get a message from someone that is so exciting, that it's so exhilarating. Man, I can't believe this. I can't breathe right now, so you're happy, you're thrilled about that, And then other times there are other contexts that it gets used too. That's how that phrase is being used throughout the opera, okay? That's really important. The other thing that's very important is the opera is not constructed where the assumption is you're going to sit there for however long the opera is, for the duration of the opera, that you're only expecting to have this guilt trip of, this is such a horrific act. Here's a series of horrific acts in 6. It never works that way with this particular approach to I Can't Breathe, the opera. The approach is that you're going to have insights and emotional reactions to people's everyday experiences in life, some being good, some being bad. Like with the scholar, he's moving into his apartment. He has an armful of packages that he's moving into and he gets on the elevator with the white woman. And the classic scenario is the white woman panics. She doesn't even want to be on the elevator with his hands filled with stuff moving in. And so she won't even consider pushing the button when he requests it. She finally does. And unbeknownst to him, she goes and calls the police, So that's not such a great experience. She calls the police to the point that they come and burst in and then kill him being in his own apartment, okay? So that's one aspect, right? But there are other times where it's just pure exhilaration for how the athlete just came off of, for the scene for the athlete, has this wonderful experience in his high school basketball game where he was the star. He's so thrilled. He gets off the bus, calls his mom, just saying, you know, I was fantastic tonight. I can't wait to share this with you. And, you know, I'm off. It's clear I'm going to go to college. I think I'll just hang there for a year because I know the NBA is ready for me. So there's that kind of exhilaration. And so people get to experience all of those elements, even though the title is implying it's only going to be about maybe a George Floyd. It is not. It's about everyday life of African Americans and what they have to contend with how they get on with living full lives, and then the things that create concern and panic for the way society inflicts itself sometimes or imposes itself on an African American.
Now, I'm sure you know that finding African Americans in the opera audience typically doesn't happen because their stories are not depicted on stage, and the ones that are Aida, perhaps, Porgy and Bess, operas that have problematic histories and resonance today. With what Terence Blanchard was finally able to do with Fire Shut Up in My Bones, by having a Black composer have an opera on the stage at the Met, what hope do you have that now that that door has been burst open, that there will be room for you and other composers who have stories to tell that deserve both the attention of a major performing arts organization, but also have the ability to attract an audience that is underserved?
Now that question, it's a good question, but my response will be, I think, the opposite of what, I don't subscribe to that kind of thinking. I don't think that, first of all, I think it's a tragic perspective, not from what you're saying, but from the reality of what you're saying, is that that for all of the years of opera existing, and then in America, and then for the Met, right, that this one person gets, as you say, maybe knocked the door down, but the reality is there was William Grant Still, there's, oh man, I don't know, there's so many, there's Leslie Adams that's living yet.
Oh yeah, it was long overdue. I mean, the expiration date on those doors was decades, many decades old.
Right.
I'm not lauding the Met for finally having done this. There are a lot of people whose work still needs to be presented there that never had the chance. But I'm just wondering, do you think this, opens doors for works that haven't been done, that are decades old, and for new works moving forward?
That remains to be seen, but there's no reason for me to put faith in that. I'll try to be, I tend to be candid. And so I'll be candid here, and I'm not going to regret it because I've watched it happen over the course of my adult life, is when organizations that are very prominent in the classical world, it's been my experience that they designate their Negro for the year. And what I mean by that is, and so that year can transfer into a decade, into a century, and then it might not even be, the Blackness might only be the people on stage, but it's George Gershwin that's written it. You know what I'm saying? In order for any Black people, now, all of that has advanced to a great extent. But this idea of will the door get open? It's been my observation, my experience, that door, the crack gets open for somebody to get in, then it's just quietly, if not outright, closed again until the next set of sociological circumstances insist that there's a change. Does that make sense to you? What I'm saying?
It does.
I put Creedon's credit only into my tenacity for myself, which will be no different than any other Black artist that wakes up every day committing to the art, right? Because the implication, again, is for an organization that is allowing a door to be open for the moment, is it can also possibly convert or become its own variation of the plantation owners. There's a perfect example, without me naming names, of a company where they wanted a series of Black composers recently to contribute to an anniversary of something that wasn't great, okay? And in the process, they decide, okay, this is great. We're going to do this public relations wise. It's going to be absolutely perfect. It's going to benefit us until they get the content of the Black composer's work, and then the content of the Black composer's libretto, which doesn't jive with what they want their perception of America to be. And so then what happens is they call back, not unlike a plantation owner, oh, you can't do that. We can't do that for you. Yes, we got this door open, but we got the door open so that we can benefit from it for the perception of who we are, as opposed to the perception of what you are and what life is. You understand? Mm-hmm. So business of getting doors open, and we're going to get up every day. You look at the news today, people are suppressing the idea of, there's a great line from I Can't Breathe, the opera. It is Black Lives Matter to those living Black lives, right? And so that, if you think about that for one moment, what is more logical than that statement? But that statement will get parsed where it'll then be a focus of a means to suppress people even further. Oh, no, 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 you cannot think like that, when it's nothing but saying, I like to live my life like any other human being. Oh, no, 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 you cannot do that. So to get a door open from an opera company where they're saying, oh, no, 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 you can't do that, but you can do this, and then we'll dictate how Black you can or can't be. I'm just saying that's the way the world works.
Well, I hope in our lifetimes that there starts to be more substantive change, but I fear that it's not going to happen until there are more women and more people of color in leadership roles. Because until you see people in the offices who look like you and less like me, you're not going to see a difference on the stage, and you're not going to see a difference in what gets performed.
That's right.
That's my personal belief.
I agree.
So back to the opera for a minute. Is there anything that you learned from the production of Marble City Opera earlier this year that has prompted any kind of changes or revisions before it gets performed, or is the work done?
The work is done. I also tend to work that way. I'll give you a quick example. When I first wrote my first opera, Vanquis, which is actually, it's going to be performed 2 weeks after Pacific Opera does its run on the 13th of May through the 15th of I Can't Breathe. Then Opera Columbus is doing my opera, Vanquis. When I say my opera, it's written with, and I have to stress this, with John A. Williams, one of the most important American / African-American poets, author, educator, So when I first started working on that with John, John went home, he took the subject matter, created the first scene, and he sent me the scene. And so I received a scene and I write the music. And when I say I think the music is perfect, what I mean by that is it's not perfect by everyone's standard. It's perfect for what I'm trying to convey, and it's the best I can do. That's my perfect, is the best I can do. Okay, so the idea then was I sent, I write it, it's all set and everything. Then John sends me the next libretto, and the libretto is the same scene, but he's revised it. And I'm looking, you can't do that, because I'm in a panic now, because he's a writer, and he's such a writer that he's going to keep looking at the work and deciding, I can refine this, I can refine this, I can do that, and this will be a better statement. But it disrupted everything that I was writing. So I had to ask John, I said, look, please, I'm saying, first, give me permission, because I wrote the music, I can't change it. I don't want it, it wouldn't even be, it would be like starting all over again, number one. So we came to an agreement at my request that, please don't send me the next piece of libretto until you know it's absolutely what you want it to be. Because hours and hours are spent trying to convey those lines into and converting them into music as well. So I'm saying all that to say, I tend not to write music and then go back and make changes. It's just not particularly my style. But what was an interesting outcome in our rehearsing at Marble City was, by the time we rehearsed the finale, Catherine and whoever, they came up with an idea and they asked me, what do you think of this? They took a portion of the choral finale, the choral portion of the finale, and asked, could we put it right up front before the first scene where it's just, you know, the single, and that way it would convey the energy and the character of the overall work. And then to take it into these individuals, it added more power to it. And I just thought it was an excellent idea. So that was one of the changes. There wasn't a change of music or anything, but just a reordering of the placement in a way to make it more powerful.
Right.
So,
Right. I want to ask you one more question before we conclude our conversation. You know, in the past few years, you know, hip hop artists, pop artists, jazz artists have all used their creative minds to tackle what's going on in America right now, to deal with the BLM movement, to deal with the injustice that is happening at the hands of police and things like that. What role do you think time and distance will play in our ability and our perspective of this moment in time? And what role would you like this opera to play in that conversation many years down the road?
that it will always be a remembrance, if that's the right word, that right now, people sit in the audience and they're moved to tears because of what they're witnessing and then how they relate it to their personal lives. Both as African, we're not gearing this stuff to limit it only to an African-American audience. There are whites that sit in the audience as well as African-Americans that identify with varying segments of the work. And if they have these humanism elements to their being, then they're identifying in so many ways, you know. And there'll be some that may identify more with the outcome of how what happens to the Black character in the opera, and that's fine and well for what it is too, right? But for what we want people to be able to be reflective of what they're experiencing, and to be open to have their perspectives expanded in a way that allows for a better community, a better society, a more humanistic, caring society. Sometimes if you're white, you're looking at certain things, you don't even know that you're looking at something that is absolutely detrimental to anyone other than you. And that's fine, because you get to benefit from that. But if this helps to open your eyes to what is more just, what is more equal, then that is one of the things, the takeaways from this experience today. For the experience down the line, one is you hope that people will sit and say, oh my God, I couldn't believe that the world was like that. That hasn't happened in our 400 years or whatever years of history of America for the moment, because we're seeing things that are so reminiscent of the period of slavery and vanquished that are utilized right to this moment. Not, I was trying to say the opera vanquished represents that, right? And so here we are today, from vanquished about slavery and abolitionists to I Can't Breathe, and the same issues are at hand, is troubling. So down the road, as history goes on, we'll hope that people will sit and say, I can't believe society ever worked like that, but I'm glad this piece is here to remind us of what life was like, and what we should never aspire to, because it will be so detrimental. Or they'll sit there and say, my God, nothing has changed, and what can I do to help make this change? That's what I'd like to see happen with the experience of the opera I Can't Breathe.
Well, that's a perfect ending, and I will just put a button on that by saying I was brought up with the golden rule, and it seems like everybody's life would be a hell of a lot easier if we just all abided by that. Whether you're religious or not, it seems like that's just a simple axiom that should guide every action.
Well, you keep making me say very good.
Well, good. I feel like I passed the exam.
Very good.
Leslie, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate this. Are you all right with my posting this interview on our YouTube channel?
Absolutely.
Terrific. I will make sure that the POP people know about it so that you can be aware of when it's up and running.
Sounds good. Thank you for doing a great job.
Thank you, sir. Good talking to you.
Good talking with you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.